Alrighty, y'all, welcome back. This is part 2 of the Smokeless Firepit build video. I've got a mixer here. We're going to start mixing some concrete and dumping it in the form right after we add a couple more of the breathe holes for the concrete form. So let's get into it.
Alrighty, so I didn't actually get a chance to film adding those holes, but all I did was drill a hole in between each of the 4 to make 6 around. Here you can see all of the holes that I drilled around the top of the rim. It's about 2 inches down and about every 2 inches around the rim, and that's a 5/8 hole. Alrighty, so what you're going to see here is us mixing up the concrete. First off, I would say make sure you get a mixer. It's about $30 for 4 hours at Home Depot, and if you rent it after 6 p.m., you can return it the next morning. Now, this whole process really only took us about an hour and a half, but it just makes everything a lot easier to not have to stress about returning it the night of when you're all dirty and all that kind of stuff. Now, you'll notice I'm cutting the bags in half and I'm dumping it into the mixer. I would suggest adding about 3 bags worth of water, which is around 1.5 gallons to 2 gallons, or a little more than that, and then dumping 1 bag in, mixing it until it's well incorporated, and then dumping in the next, and then repeating the process until you've dumped in your 3 bags. Lastly, I would say make sure you take a shovel and you shove all the way around between the steel and the front of the form just to get any air bubbles out of the front face of the form. That way there's a smooth surface on the outside of the pit. Then lastly, you're going to see me floating the top of the concrete with a piece of wood. That just brings the moisture to the top and leaves a nice smooth surface across the top of the concrete.
Alrighty, y'all, it's the next day. We're going to take this form off and then we're going to start putting the topper blocks on right after that. So let's get to it.
So for starters on this, all we're going to do is remove the form by pulling out each of the stakes. Those were nailed into the form, remember? So I'm just basically beating them away from the form and then pulling them up out of the ground. Then I'm going to go around and gently knock on each of the PVC pipes. You want to be kind of gentle because the concrete is still kind of soft in the core of the concrete, but it is hard enough to keep its form after about 12 hours. So basically just knock those out with a hammer, and then I used another piece of PVC to knock out the other PVCs that were a little bit tight. And I also gave it a vertical kind of wiggle just to loosen up the concrete around it. So now all I'm doing is pulling out all of the sand from the edges and then smoothing it flat, and then you'll see me throw the ring in the center. Basically I'm just making it to where the ring will kind of sit evenly against the edges of the form. You'll notice too those jagged edges on the inside of the concrete. That's what I was talking about in the last video, where I should have created a ring with the form first before staking in parts of the ring and then just attaching another additional piece. So then on the center I added these marble chips from Home Depot. They're about $4 a bag, and I think I used about 6 bags in the center. First off, I used about 2 bags just on the edges of the inside to level out the ring and get it flush with the top of the concrete. And then later I came back and filled in a couple more bags just to make it look a little better. The goal with the rocks in the center is to allow air to travel through the rocks underneath and kind of give the bottom of the fire a bit more oxygen so it burns cleaner. Here you can see I'm starting to bring in my topper stones. These are just limestone kind of concrete-like blocks that I also got from Home Depot. Here you can see me just adjusting them kind of one by one to get the alignment and pattern that I wanted all the way around. You'll also notice the last stone didn't exactly fit. I eventually end up not putting that one in and just filling in with mortar around.
Alright, so as you can see here, this is the rough layout. Now, you'll notice there are different overhangs kind of all the way around. For instance, it's pretty much flush right here. Then as you come over here, it overhangs about 1 inch at most. I was going for a 2-inch overhang, but I just made my outer ring too large. Didn't really do a whole lot of precision with this project. I was just trying to kind of get it done. So I didn't make the perfect circles. If you spend more time on the form and you don't just use this kind of material just randomly kind of staked into a rough circle, you'll get a better outcome. But I didn't really care for that here because this is kind of an outdoor piece, and just the grand size of it will make up for the kind of minor visual defects that I can find. So the next step from here is going to be taking off these stones and then going ahead and putting mortar down to attach them to the base. And then we'll also be using the mortar to fill in any of these large cracks you see here, because what we can't have is cold air coming up through this crack, because we need all the cold air to come out these holes. And if you'll remember, we use the PVC pipes down there to create 6 holes all the way around for cold air to come in from the outside. We left 4 holes at the bottom, one there, one over here, and one over here, to let some oxygen into the bottom of the fire to help it burn. But we left the majority of the holes at the top to allow for the cold air to come in through the side here, travel up the wall of the steel, and then come out the holes to reignite the smoke. So next up, we'll do the mortar.
So all I'm doing here is some last final adjustments of the ring, getting it up underneath the topper rocks nice and flush so there's no air gap. And after that, we'll be ready for the mortaring process. So here all I'm doing is filling the Home Depot bucket with a little bit of water for half of the Quikrete mix. I didn't end up using much more than half of the bag, so take note of that. And then all I'm doing is putting about a 1/4 inch worth on the middle of the stone where the concrete underneath will sit to attach it to the concrete. And then I'm putting what feels right between the stones on one side. So basically I put it on the right side of the stone, I put it in place, smash it up, fill in the gap, make sure there's no air holes underneath or on top, and then I go to the next one and repeat the process. And as you'll see shortly here, I go ahead and do that all the way around, and I use just about all the mortar out of that Home Depot bucket. And to not bore you, we'll go ahead and speed this up. Now the last 2, I wanted to make sure I used the rest of the space up. Now, like I mentioned before, I didn't actually use that last stone that I chipped away at, so here I'm actually putting a lot of mortar between the edges of the last stone to fill in that gap. It's not the prettiest looking thing, but honestly it's hardly noticeable at the end once it's all said and done. Now I'm just going to go around and hand form any of the seams to make sure they're nice and smooth and pretty. Clean up any leftover mortar on the back side.
Alrighty, y'all, so as you can see, the masonry work is complete. We've put the toppers on here using some of that masonry mix by Quikrete. All in all, it was a pretty simple process. I actually only used half a bag of that 80-pound bag right there. Got a little bit left over as well. Basically just mixed it up with water and applied it to the brick first, as you saw in the video, and then applied it to one side, set the brick down, filled in the gaps that were left, and then moved on to the next one. Pretty quick process, only took about an hour or so to do, and yeah, that's complete now. So all that's left for this to be done is to get a little more rock for the center and then let it dry. Additionally, before I open this for real use, I want to do a couple high heat burns just to burn off any of the galvanized material on this ring to make sure that we don't have any poisoning happening.
So that'll be it for this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to see more content like this. You'll notice the fire isn't burning smokeless. The reason for that is I actually need a much more intense fire for it to be smokeless. The wood in this fire is essentially just smoldering, but once it gets going and the fire burns hot, there's relatively no smoke, and it does a very good job. But anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.